Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you today and share my insights from my first 3 months as GBTA's new CEO. It's really the summer of new travel and new travelers. So let's dive in. First, there are the changes in necessity of travel. So, who is traveling and why? And from the dozens of conversations that I'm having industry wide, the number one driver for non essential travel, which is what needs to start up again in the business world, will probably be senior leaders getting back on the road. I think the number two driver will be sales and customer visits. And number three will be various kinds of internal travel for team and culture building that has been so missing for the last 15 or 18 months. And of course, those in public health who have never stopped traveling will keep traveling as they need to make sure that the world continues its path forward through the pandemic recovery. But over the summer and into the fall, budgets are still under heavy scrutiny on a global basis, and virtual has made at least phone call centric meetings more collaborative and will not go away anytime soon. So, what about the number of trips when they do return? I'm hearing that for a while there may be fewer internal meeting trips for the next 12 months, and there may also be far fewer quarterly vendor reviews that everybody had been used to. They can do three of them virtually, and one of them probably needs to be in person. But I'm also hearing that corporate travelers are far more willing and maybe likely now to combine trips and meetings, fewer trips, but longer ones, to do a few cities within 2 to 3 days, within 1 week, rather than doing them all in separate trips, thus allowing for there to be days and maybe weeks where they don't travel, when in the past they may have had to do at least one trip a week. And finally, as this slide shows, we can't forget that Generation Z is predicted to make up the estimated 40% of the workforce this year. That was from Connect Team's survey last year in 2020. This is a generation that was raised on technology first, and everything Ben talked about is totally relevant for that generation. By 2024, millennials and Generation Z will be the majority of travelers, influencing travel technology trends such as mobile first. So while we're talking about pandemic recovery, we need to also prepare for a very different digital first traveler becoming the majority very soon. Next slide, please. And what about the new nature of travel and work? It has to do with, number one, transient travel. Most of us on the phone today on the business side are familiar with that. It's also very much about meetings and groups travel. Much of some of our research has been showing has been starting to be combined on the corporate space to manage both transient and meetings within the same budget. And the third kind of travel, which we're just starting to hear about and learn more about, thanks in part to some like IHG CEO talking about it recently, is called return to base. And this is about the nomad workers who've left their city centers and left their commute, but now still need to come back to the office from time to time when those offices are open again. Businesses all over the world are reassessing the real estate they need, not only to impress their customers, of course, but also to maintain corporate culture and deliver the highest productivity possible. Some lessons learned in 2020 and 2021 will not be quickly forgotten. And most companies I'm speaking to have new flex work or work from home policies now that are either already complete or in the process of being finalized for fall execution. Back in March, we surveyed our global member base, and 70% of both buyers and suppliers said that by the end of 2021, most employees would be returning to the office at least some days every week. But nearly 10% said that would happen at least after 12 months. And maybe that portion of companies, those 10%, will maintain a permanent remote or work from anywhere workforce going forward. Next slide, please. So besides where and how often employees need to be in an office or in meetings, what practices and policies has the pandemic most affected? I'd be interested to know how Ben's company is responding. But as far as practices that we see on the ground, contactless everything will likely continue and expand rapidly, from additional use of biometrics at airports to virtual payments and central payments at hotels. Some companies are instilling digital wallets via their corporate cards so employees can point and pay rather than hand over their cards. And as far as policy changes, the obvious one that non-essential business travel is still stopped or at least tightly monitored or approved until sometime between now and September or October 1st is really the primary one. We're also hearing from nearly 100% of our member companies that pre-trip approval will be in place for non-essential business travel for at least through the end of 2021. And it all depends on how the pandemic recovery goes. Much like essential travel had to be approved or still does in parts of the world where the pandemic is or has been recently surging. This is a dramatic change from 2019 when pre-trip approval was being phased out in many multinational companies. Some companies are also combining sustainability efforts to manage travel now more sustainably overall, and I'll have a bit more to say about that in a moment. Next slide, please. Some things from 2019 carry forward, including that data and analytics and the insights that they drive are still the fuel for customers. 73% of travel company executives from the supplier side also reported in 2019 that data analytics was critical or very important to their business success of their companies. So it used to be that an idea would be followed by analysis, followed by data to back it up. As you'll see from this graphic, it's really the other way around now. Now, pattern checking and analysis is followed by resulting ideas on what that data means about risks and opportunities and what a business needs to do to course correct and go in the right direction. So managed travel RFPs in all kinds of categories are one example. They've been a part of managed travel for a few decades now. GBTA has led the way with our templates in this space, in particular the hotel RFP format, which is going through a refresh now even as we speak. But the core purpose of RFPs are to establish what's new in the market, what price those new and traditional services should cost, and whether there's a good cultural fit. Those technologies that Ben was talking about, this is where RFPs often reveal that there's something new that's brewing. RFPs drive data, most importantly, for decision-making for corporate buyers like Ben. So given the huge upending of the marketplace, these RFPs will likely grow in the near future as travel buyers try to assess what the new normal is, what their buying power is, and what kinds of effects this summer and fall surging travel in the leisure space will have on corporate pricing. Next slide, please. So how can a TMC stay relevant during this tumultuous time? Ben's ideas were absolutely right on the mark. I come from a tech background and I could relate to everything that Ben was talking about. But duty of care from a TMC space has never been more critically important. And that, along with budget management, is really the most important service that a TMC provides. So restructuring all customer communication around these next 12 months of duty of care during these next recovery months could certainly make sense. Companies will continue to pay for services, I believe, as Ben also said, which are deemed critical and which that company cannot provide themselves. TMCs are really in a sweet spot for consolidation of services from procurement to trip planning technology, and ultimately within trip services, on the ground disruption services to take care of the once again inevitable disruptions. Services that provide pandemic-related insights, how to travel, what can the traveler expect upon leaving, arriving, and ultimately returning. Can artificial intelligence and chatbots automate parts of that customer service journey to the event that a TMC is even more responsive if someone needs help? That Generation Z traveler, how will they expect to be communicated in the future? And are you targeting their user experience? Ultimately, the way TMCs price services, as Ben also talked about, needs to take into consideration operational foundations at a time when many foundations were trimmed to the bare minimum. Hotel commissions and transaction fees cannot sustain a business like that of TMCs when there are no transactions or hotel bookings at all. So TMCs will need to learn to tell their stories, to sell strategically, creating a hierarchy of what they can provide to any traveling company and their travelers, and being transparent on what the benefits and costs are to work together. The goal could be a retainer pricing that is not completely dependent on number of transactions growing significantly. And I agree with Ben that there will be other innovations for which you can charge, again, on a transaction basis. Automation and operational right sizing are surely part of that perfect equation. And like anything, it's as much art as science with a strong future vision, the story that you tell. Next slide, please. And while public health is everyone's current concern, government response is critical. Recent GBTA polling from May, in fact, finds when asked to describe the single greatest barrier to business travel in the current environment, over half of GBTA members and stakeholders cited government policies that restrict travel, cross-border travel, or make it difficult, followed by company policies restricting employees from traveling, and finally, travel budget freeze or cost savings. So the restrictions from travel are on everybody's mind, especially when it comes to travel buyers restarting travel. Respondents based in the UK, Europe, and Canada actually were much more likely to cite this government stopping rather than in the United States, where domestic travel has really picked up again on the leisure side. But we've also heard from 70% of the same survey respondents who say that government can be part of the solution, and they would look to their governments to create cross-border standards and tech specs for business travelers to have the best possible outcomes with any business trip during this recovery period. Europe and Canada, interestingly, had the highest rates of response on this question. Next slide, please. And indeed, we are finding there are plans for business travel's return, and I'll share with you some of these stats now. Next slide, please. From our May poll, there was a 10% dip, actually, a reduction in companies canceling domestic travel, likely caused by lockdowns being removed in the UK and some easing of restrictions across Europe. But you can see that the trend line has also been decreasing a lot from the 90% that it was a year ago. Next slide, please. When it comes to resuming domestic travel soon in the next 1 to 3 months, as defined by this survey, there was a 5 percentage point increase to 42%, or nearly 10% better than in April, in the number of companies who will resume some level of domestic travel soon. But it won't be back at 2019 levels for a while. According to our GBTA March poll, 36 to 38% believe face-to-face visits to sales customers, that's prospects or current customers, will be the same or higher than 2019. That's well below half. And by comparison, 31%, or a third, think that internal travel will be at or near 2019 levels. So two-thirds, fully two-thirds, do not expect that full recovery. If you go to the next slide, please. International business travel remains largely locked down. That's no surprise, I think, to any of us. 92% have stopped all international business travel. It's been a slight improvement since the beginning of the pandemic. And next slide, please. But the deep freeze here is thawing somewhat as well. 13% see some international travel occurring again in the next 1 to 3 months. That, of course, depends on borders opening, and nearly 25% better than it was in April. Next slide, please. At GBTA, we've been doing as much as possible to get the global travel industry ready for the restart, advocating with governments as well as with our members. So 679 people participated in our recent 4-week Ready Safe Travel program in May, done on a regional and global basis with instructors and volunteers providing updated information on pandemic-era topics that included procurement practices and the new normal, traveler communications, supplier relationship management, data privacy, travel ROI, diversity, and so on. We also included topic areas made more prevalent in the last 15 months, like sustainability, workforce risk management, digital nomads, and how to approach meetings and event planning. What was particularly interesting to me is that we had a wide range of professional experience in the attendees who registered. They weren't just novice members. They were the very, very seasoned all the way to the beginners. So everyone really, truly is looking for insights and new best practices as we emerge from this pandemic. Next slide, please. And what about sustainability? I mentioned this before. From aviation's goals of sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, to hotels' green initiatives, to mobility's drive to electric vehicles, there are many, many ways that corporate buyers now want to measure and track that their corporate travel program is meeting their corporate sustainability goals. GBTA is driving this conversation and standards in consultation with our industry partners to make sure that we don't just come back to business travel, but that we come back better. You'll see education beginning Tuesday, June 2nd this week, from us on sustainability, going all the way through to our November US convention in Orlando, Florida. In Europe, of course, the conversation surely includes using trains instead of planes when possible, and for airlines around the world, both sustainable fuel choices and access to those fuels all the way to the airports needs to be coupled with aircraft innovation. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done in this area to make these dreams and plans reality. Next slide, please. Finally, let me conclude my remarks today, thanking you for your kind attention. I know Ben and I will be on for some Q&A now with the optimistic view that we will soon see business travel safe and innovative return. Thank you so much.